welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price, and this is a follow-up video on my thoughts about a potential 100th faction. If you haven't watched last week's video, I suggest you pause this one and go back. The link will be in the description. As I said last week, I think the 100th faction is a crucial milestone to be celebrated, as this is a phenomenon that extends well beyond the gaming industry. But what does such a celebration look like? That's what I wanted to talk about today, because it's hard. Some players raised valid points. How do you give the 100th faction a level of distinction while still showing that you care about the others just as much? It's certainly difficult, but I think that it's okay to have a little extra to show every now and then without negating the importance of everything that comes before and after a milestone. To approach this topic, I wanted to consider it from the same two aspects of every faction, theme and mechanics, ultimately arriving at how I chose to celebrate the 100th faction. Will I stick the landing? Let's find out. From a thematic perspective, even though theme is less important than mechanics to me, I think milestone factions are the exception where it is reversed. It's super cool to know that there was a 50th faction, but it was less cool to learn that it was Granny's, which wasn't even explained well. So what does a 100th theme look like? There are a few options that come to mind. The first option is the most limited. To look at the internal lore, which is almost non-existent in Smash Up, a game where zombies and dinosaurs coexist with samurai in Spider-Verse. The theme is literally anything. That being said, there is an organization who plays a role in Smash Up, and that's Havoc, the occasionally alluded to villain organization that would have been a great choice for a theme. It would make what little history Smash Up has matter. What would they do? No idea, but the theme would be a fun starting point. The second option is to choose an existing theme and do it over. I honestly think that if Smash Up were to redo vampires, the community would go nuts for it. I know a certain Yellow Lantern who certainly would. Vampires are often described as a top 10 theme with a bottom 10 execution, so admitting that mistake and fixing them properly, even if you kept the same art, would be a big win. I don't think players would view it as paying for it twice. I think it would legitimately be well received. Prior to Backtimers, I would have said that time travelers could get the same treatment, and there would be something ironic about doing over do-over. The next option is to do what some members of the Smash Up community did, and continue the sports motif they did with the Misfits faction. The Misfits are the anti-All-Stars. They take existing cards who are terrible fits in their faction, and give them a more meaningful home. Cards like Winds of Change, Venus Mantrap, Raider. The chosen theme here is lacrosse, but the execution is really done well. Given that the All-Stars are often mistaken for 50th faction when they are really the 51st, it would have been funny to make the anti-All-Stars the 100th. It also shows a great awareness for what cards didn't work historically and find a new meaningful home for them. Another option is to choose a slam dunk theme that everyone could appreciate, one where you would say, yeah, that makes sense as a 100th candidate. Prior to their inclusion, candidates that jumped out to me would have been skeletons or goblins, both fantasy staples with wide appeal. Luchadors were also wildly popular, even though that theme goes back longer. People are constantly asking for cryptids or elementals. Basically, parsing the runner-ups from the Oops vote would have been a good source of inspiration. I am legally obligated to mention what I think makes the most sense in this category, which is clowns, as there is a vocal minority who really wants clowns in the game. And come on, why not? With each of these themes, they may not be your personal choice, but they should be understandable and acceptable. To explain this phenomenon, I often think back to the final spot in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. I had 4 dream candidates, some of which were more realistic than others. Did I want Sora? No. Did it make sense? Absolutely. Sora's inclusion was unquestionable because of the mark that Kingdom Hearts made on the video game industry. And the Smash Bros. Director even said that Sora's inclusion was a celebration of gaming. So while I would personally vote supervillains, if it were clowns I'd understand that, and I'd celebrate that, because it makes sense. But I personally think that there is a better theme. While I believe very strongly that the idea of strict parity was introduced in Cease and Desist, and backported to expansions before then by the fan community, it is nevertheless a fundamental part of the game's identity today. So what do you parody? Well, I got a flash of inspiration from a Discord community project. The community made parodies of various board games, and several of my friends were included, like Captain Cosmic, Beryl, Ludicrousness, Onasi, Lonan, and depending on the day, and I quote. Also, Sir Errant was there. I decided to try to get in on the fun, mostly just to spite Lonan, and I started thinking, what would be the best game to parody in a Smash Up faction? And I decided that the answer was secretly in front of me the whole time. Smash Up itself, to go full meta. What started as a joke of me running down random abilities out of spite turned into something that I genuinely loved because I felt like I was celebrating the game I've spent years playing, analyzing, and promoting. For the second half of this video, I'm actually going to share that faction now. Of course, I feel tremendous pressure to create something that can live up to the hype, especially when I'm setting myself up for failure. So I'll say this up front. Quality, particularly the notion of what is best, is often subjective. Just look at Base Off. And my goal is to produce something high quality, but I can't control the audience's reaction directly. What I can do is make my intentionality unquestionable. To create something that screams passion and love for this game, that shows that I understand it deeply and approach it from the perspective of a tremendous fan. And I do believe I've accomplished that. Because with this faction, which I call the Centurions, given that I was making them as my Fantasy 100th faction, their core premise is extremely faithful and simple. They are a faction who intimately knows that they are a Smash Up faction. Meta references galore. At its core, Smash Up is a game about combining two factions together, so why not make a faction who knows it's partnered with another faction? While I believe Centurions have a very strong 5-card identity, I actually think it's best reflected in their Soldier. Soldier has the on-play ability to play a card of another faction, presumably your partner faction. When you compare other soldiers, plenty can play actions, some can play minions of various types, Wanwiz can play either using a cost. If most of these cards can play half your deck, then Soldier playing half of your deck is also appropriate, it's just a different half, your other half. But looking at their 5-card identity, the Centurions are led by Leader, and Crank It Up fans see where this naming scheme is going. Leader has the global ability. Before any base scores, if you have a minion there, you will reveal 2 cards from your deck until you reveal cards from 2 factions. So if I'm playing Centurion Dinosaurs, I will reveal ultimately 1 Centurion card and 1 Dinosaur card. I will set aside the first card I see of either faction, like War Raptor or Soldier in this example, and have a chance to play it after cleaning everything else up. At this point, I want to point out that these ideas are actually simpler than the words I had to use for the ability. It's just for Smash Up's wording scheme, it is a lot harder to express certain abilities that could really have been simplified with keywords. I am actually very intentional on the wording of all these cards, particularly when it comes to the word extra, which is unnecessary by the actual rules. So Leader gives you a last chance to play a card of either faction to swing things at the last moment. While you don't know exactly what you will get, you know it will belong to one of your 2 factions, right? Wrong. Smashed Up is one of their double features, which starts smashing multiple decks together. Smashed Up shuffles a card from every player's discard into your deck. Now some players will remember the Viking rules and state that this doesn't work, but guess what? It does, because I said so. Because Vikings can get away with it. And we'll leave it at that for now. Smashed Up gives you a small chance that Leader will actually hit a different faction. And while the odds of hitting it is small, the certainty of what you get if you do hit it is really high. From a philosophical perspective, most of the time I view the discard as thieving fair game. It's in your discard pile because you used it, or you discarded it because you didn't want to use it. And if you used it, you probably won't get it back anyway, since most factions lack recursion. And if you don't want me to take it, save it for later. Sometimes cards like Smashed Up suppress good plays, which is just as valuable. There's also the realistic chance that I never even see it again when I steal it, and it's diluting my deck, even though this is clearly part of the 5-card identity. This ties directly into Elite, which is quite possibly my favorite Elite in the system. I love this card. I get so excited when I draw one of them. Its success rate is empirically about 50%, but the sifting also matters, especially in setting up Leader. At the end of the turn, Elite will reveal the top 2 cards of your deck. If they are different factions, you get to draw both of them potentially and reposition all other cards. This means sifting if you get unlucky, which may set up the other elite. It means sifting just to cycle through your deck. It can mean stashing a card on top of your deck for a leader play, since that card will be there for a turn. Yes, it means that your deck is exposed and vulnerable, but that's counterplay. So Elite serves multiple purposes in having high ceiling draw power while also directly benefiting from Smashed Up, because taking a single card of a faction guarantees Elite's ability to draw it. Once again, the Viking rules are completely suspended, because I've seen what it takes to make this card work unambiguously, and it is an eyesore. So thank you, Viking rules. The other double feature may seem out of place, but it's not. Minion Modifier. Originally, I named this Northern Modifier because it is Northern Mover the modifier, but I included this because the Centurions are also about choice. The first choice you make is between two factions, and this honors that while doing a lot more for the faction. And you'll see that the theme of this faction is all about choice. Before I get to the rest of the actions, I want to talk about the final minion recruit. The recruit has the talent to gain temporary power equal to the number of distinct ability types on your minions on its base. Leader has a special. Elite has an ongoing. Soldier an on-play. Recruit a talent. These are the four main ability types, although Recruit is future-proofed so that if any crazy label shows up in the future, Recruit is ready. Recruit falls into that category of strong but earned. It generally caps out as a slightly weaker Rainbow Girl with more flexibility at play, but you have to be very diligent about what minions you play, because Swarm alone won't give you the power. You certainly need another Recruit to get to the 3 for the talent alone. But the Recruit also gives you several playstyles, both power activation and come at me, because the power is until the start of your turn as opposed to the end of the turn. Something that I've long said Howler should have done, which is why Howler is on the art. I think all these cards are an opportunity to showcase iconic cards in a Lampoon faction to be a time capsule of the game over 100 factions. Spartan is certainly an iconic soldier, one who is only overshadowed by its insane leader, whereas Zombie Lord was the game's de facto marketing minion for the longest time. And Bushi is literally the only samurai card people care about, so Bushi gets the elite spot. Moving on to the rest of the actions, a card that really excites me is Choices. If you get the reference, please let me know in the comments, as I've given you a hint, and be as specific as you can. Wording this card in Smash Up Linguistics is a nightmare, particularly because of how Spirit of the Forest is worded, but Choices is a build your own wish. You can play any two cards, but they cannot be the same. You can play a small minion, or you can play some actions, as long as they are differentiated by their category. The first clause lets you choose a second or ability this turn, which could be Choices, but it could also be Minion Modifier if that is all you needed. If you go the Ghostly Arrival route, it's slightly weaker because the minion is capped. If you go the Time Loop route, the actions are discretely different, but the point is choice and flexibility, and I can honestly say that I've used all 6 combinations of abilities. You have to consider what you play carefully, because it's important that your factions are balanced. Faction balance takes a look at what cards you are actually playing. Are you playing your cards equally, or are you favoring one side too much? Faction balance has you reveal your hand and make pairs of 2 different factions. This is actually harder than you realize, because I've noticed your hand naturally becomes lopsided as it gets larger. If you have a hand of 10 cards, you at most could get 4, and it would be a ton of work, so you get an extra action to compensate. If I can get 3 power counters and an extra action, that's a big win for me, but it requires me to be super intentional and utilize Elite well. For the remaining 4 actions, this is where things really start to dig deep into the design space. Rules expert timing really excites me because this is a foundational principle that has never been explored. Did you play an extra card immediately or not? Leader plays an extra card immediately. Soldier is a choice. Both cards of choices are a choice. Faction balance is a choice. Many factions grant extra plays. Rules expert timing draws attention to the timing of your plays, giving you 2 above average options, but is subject to how you use those plays. If the card was played immediately, you can draw a card. Note the implication for Soldier. Normally, I'd bank the play, hoping to draw a card and play the banked card. This is the opposite. To draw the card, you must use the play right away. To compensate, it reacts to any extra card, including actions. There is even a way to make choices do a little bit of both, but only if you are a rules expert when it comes to timing. The next base modifier is Base Modifier. Note the inclusion of after the first time, which I've said should never be used, but I'm clearly using it here for a reason. If you understand why this card exists and why it is worded the way it is, leave a comment and tell me what Easter egg you found. Regardless, you have yet another choice, one between a permanent power counter and larger temporary power, which is a very flexible card with an interesting callback. Big Fat Loot is a special action that does something really odd. It rewards all players according to how well they did on a base. Yes, this could be a solo draw 5 cards, but if you got that, you earned it. It could just as easily be a 5/3/2 draw card for players respectively. My favorite usage of this card was one you probably wouldn't do unless you were me. I actually played it having lost a base to only draw 2 cards. My thinking was that I don't think the winner of the current base is getting another turn, so even though they are drawing more cards, I am still drawing some and I'll take my chances. Given the ability of Centurions to set up come at me plays, this is really strong as an action that can be played on someone else's turn, giving me a large burst for faction balance on my next turn. To me, this is a simple, clean ability that speaks to the heart of Smash Up while doing something that's really never been done before. The final action exists for many reasons, and that is owned by any player. It's a minion modifier for choices. It grants another special ability for Recruit since the ability is given to the minion. It puts another card into your deck for Leader and Elite. It ties several strategies together. Overpayment, come at me, solo plays. I find that it really ties the entire faction together, and I hope that this is an A+ Easter egg. Looking at the faction's internal balance, you will see 2 specials, 2 ongoings, 3 on plays, and 3 talents for Recruit. For choices, you have 3 standard actions, 3 minion modifiers, and 2 base modifiers. Rules Expert Timing is a choice. Base modifier is a choice. Everything about this faction is choice, because that's what Smash Up means to me. My biggest pet peeve is when people try to undersell just what complexity this game has. They think of it as being light and casual, but there's a ton of depth, because how you choose to play your turn, how you choose to set up your combos, these are incredibly important choices, and I wanted to reflect that in the 100th faction in the best way possible by parodying it itself. I have played the Centurions almost a quarter of a century times, and they have felt extremely smooth to me. They use a lot of advanced ideas, but their premise is Smash Up at its core because it looks inward. Here's my final elevator pitch. Take Soldier. Ignoring its rank, does this feel like an ability that should be in the game? Doesn't it feel crazy that we've gone 100 factions without seeing it? If this isn't the mechanic that celebrates 100 factions of this game, then what is? Knowing when something is done is a challenge in its own right, and perfection is always something I am seeking, but Centurions are my favorite faction I've ever created for this game. I am genuinely excited every time I play them, and I think they open a lot of avenues for the game while acknowledging many significant moments of its history. I'm hoping to make a full bleed version of the faction for those who want to print it physically, but you will see links for the current version in the description within 24 hours. What do you think of the Centurions? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let's shut it down.